Hi, it's Catherine here from wiseoldowl.slt.com. This week's blog is all about the one attainment trick that you might be missing. Attainment, it is the buzzword in Scotland at the moment, and I'm sure in the rest of the UK too. Extra funds have been awarded to schools to close the attainment gap in these three areas: literacy, numeracy, and health and well-being. And you can forget all of these three areas if you miss the most important skill of all, spoken vocabulary. You can forget your fancy schmancy literacy schemes if your child doesn't have spoken vocabulary. Evidence-based numeracy program, forget it if your child hasn't developed the basic vocabulary around concepts. And how does a child tell you the state of their well-being if they don't have or can't say the words to describe how they're feeling? You'd think that it would be obvious, but schools are missing the most important skill of all that underpins each of these three areas of attainment: the development of oral vocabulary. And how do I know this? Because I see evidence of it every day when I visit schools and nurseries, and also I've got kids of my own, and I can count on one finger the number of times they've been sent home with talking homework. Yet those 10 spelling words a week, they've come home every week that they were in primary school. And by the way, if anyone can point me in the direction of the evidence base behind that homework in sustaining the spelling of 10 completely out of context words, then please let me know. And here's the thing though, if you want to raise attainment, you should be focusing on increasing the spoken vocabulary in preschool children, and that is called early intervention to you and me. I cannot overemphasize the importance of introducing every child to new vocabulary every single day from the moment they're born. Okay, well, from the moment that a parent entrusts you with their child's care. Children's brains are like sponges in the early years, and they'll pick up on the words at such a fast rate. So if you want to lay the foundations for literacy skills, you've got to start with spoken vocabulary. A child is exposed to spoken language way before they'll come into contact with the written word. And how can a child write a word if they've never heard it or used it before? Learning spoken words is much easier than written words. It's a natural process. It happens every day, in everyday context, especially when children are playing. Whereas written words, on the other hand, they have to be taught. So in time, children will learn new vocabulary by reading new words in books, but the foundation stone for good reading and good comprehension lies in the words that a child hears and says before they can even learn to read or to write. So every single time that an adult interacts or communicates with a child, there is an opportunity to introduce a new word at whatever level the child can cope with at that time. So for a child just starting to talk, they need to hear new words repetitively, but only at a single word level, and that is crucial. So don't confuse hearing new words repetitively. Don't confuse that with bombarding them with a constant stream of language, because they just can't cope with it at that level. You may be less concerned about a child with more developed language, but that doesn't mean that you can't boost their skills by expanding their vocabulary. And the great thing is that you don't have to plan to do this. It just happens naturally in everyday interactions that can be adapted to the needs of the child. So I was playing in a nursery a few weeks ago, and the staff were playing with a tray of ice cubes with the children. Some of the children were very chatty and others were less so. When the early talker gave me an ice cube, I demonstrated the vocabulary brrr, cold, and ooh, wet, using gesture and pointing to help when I got a wet patch that dripped onto my trousers. Oh, wet. And the more chatty child said, I can see right through it, when they looked up at the ice cube. And I extended that by saying, yeah, it's translucent. That means you can nearly see all the way through. I need to give you a word of caution here, because you need to select the right words to use. I wouldn't use the word translucent with every child, because not all children are ready to use that word yet. It's important that you choose the target words that are developmentally appropriate for the child, and that the child then hears those chosen words regularly in different contexts, so that you can embed their learning. And you can tell a child what a word means, but until they hear it being used in different sentences and contexts, they won't attempt to use those new words themselves. Now, you can actually encourage the child as well to ask, what does that mean? Because it's going to be impossible to teach every single child every single word in the dictionary. I wish I grew up in the day of Kindles, because now if my kids don't understand a word, they get an instant definition when they press on the word in their Kindle, and that helps their understanding of a book. But when I was younger, if I didn't know a word, I didn't bother looking it up in a dictionary. So my kids' vocabulary excuse me, is actually a lot better than mine now. They're not afraid to ask what words mean or to look things up themselves. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples now of opportunities in early years settings to introduce new vocabulary. These are probably things that you already do, but I just want to reinforce that, as I said before, every single interaction is an opportunity to develop spoken vocabulary. So, for example, if a child brings you a gift in the morning, like a crumpled flower that they've picked on the way to nursery, you could say, oh, a flower, thank you. Or you could say, I love dandelions. They've got so many tiny petals, look. Now notice I didn't suggest that you could say, oh, that's a lovely flower, what's that? Because children don't learn language by answering a what's that question. If they knew it, they'd already have told you. So if you'd said, oh, that's a lovely flower, they would have said, yes, it's a dandelion. And if they didn't know it, what's the point of asking the question? So it's really important that we comment on what children are doing, comment on their actions, rather than saying, what are you doing or what's that? Because obviously some children don't have that vocabulary yet. Another example, and I love this, snack time. I really enjoy sitting down with the kids to have the snack, not just standing around and supervising. Apart from anything, it keeps the noise level because you're engaging them in conversation. But say, for example, a child says, me like carrot. You could say, yeah, I like carrots too. It's crunchy. I peeled it. That means I took the skin off it so you could eat it. So those are just a few examples of kind of times that you can be using and extending children's vocabulary in the early years setting. I hope you give spoken vocabulary a thought in your setting this week. I've added some great resources in the written version of this blog, specifically a program called Word Aware. So make sure you take a look at that. And there's a couple of other resources there as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and again, check in next week for next week's instalment of ideas to support speech and language development in the early years.